You're in the place where mysteries and the missing meet, where conspiracies lurk around every corner. Welcome to the Deep, Dark Truth.
Welcome back to the Deep, Dark Truth. I'm Mo.
I'm Chip.
And I'm Mikey.
Welcome to the third and final part of our West Virginia series covering Mothman, Indrid Cold, of course, and the Men in Black. We would love if you subscribed if you're not already on the platform of your choice. In the first part of the series, we discussed Mothman, some proposed theories of how the creature came into existence, and how over the course of 13 months in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, spanning from November of 66 to December of 1967, the legend of the creature was born. But not only were there dozens of sightings of Mothman himself, there were also sightings of mysterious strangers who were showing up on the doors of rural West Virginians and intimidating witnesses, including author John Keel himself, who coined the initialism MIB, the Men in Black. In part 2, we did a dive into the origins of the Men in Black and talked about the widely discussed theories on whom they may be, including government agents, perhaps even agents working on Project Bluebook, which was active at the time. And we also discussed the possibility that the Men in Black was just a false flag operation, a distraction from actual government programs and experiments that were happening at the time, and a deterrent for witnesses to be too scared to come forward.
And that's what you missed on DDT. It's too many syllables, but at least it rhymes.
Today we're here to talk about Indrid Cold and the link between the occurrences in West Virginia in the mid to late 60s, including Mothman, UFOs, and government agencies. But before we get started, let's hear a word from today's sponsor, HelloFresh.
Today's episode is brought to you by HelloFresh.
Do you feel like you are stuck in a dinner rut?
With HelloFresh, you can get fresh, pre-measured ingredients with mouth-watering seasonal recipes delivered right to your door.
Skip all those trips to the grocery store and count on HelloFresh to make your home cooking easy, fun, and affordable.
You can now enjoy cooking and get dinner on the table in 30 minutes or less.
With over 25 recipes to choose from each week, there's something for everyone to enjoy.
All recipes are designed and tested by professional chefs and nutritional experts to ensure deliciousness and simplicity.
My favorite meal from HelloFresh is the bruschetta chicken, but I'm sure I have many more to try in the future.
They also have vegetarian options.
Go to the link in our show notes to get $80 off, including free shipping on HelloFresh, the #1 meal kit.
Coming soon to a mailbox near you.
Welcome back. So, in the last episode, I briefly mentioned some original documentation I discovered in the Project Bluebook files, and how that singular entry provided both compelling proof that the Men in Black spotted in Point Pleasant at the time were actually government officials working on Bluebook, and also that that documentation was of Woodrow Derenberger's alleged encounter with Indrid Cold. Before I get into more detail with that, let's start with a brief history of Indrid Cold and how he fits into the happenings around Point Pleasant at the time of Mothman and the Men in Black sightings. We are going to keep Woodrow Derenberger's first contact with Indrid Cold to his own words, taken from his book, Visitors from Lanulos, My Contact with Indrid Cold. I should note that this book was later published in 1971, which is later than both the original encounter and the Project Bluebook file that we'll be discussing in a few moments. Those were both archived right after the fact in November of 1966. In fact, Woody Derenberger's encounter just barely predates the official Mothman sighting by a few weeks, as it happened on November 2nd of 1966. But his encounter was allegedly not the first encounter with the mysterious being. That took place just a few weeks prior in October by Martin Mouse Munov and James Jimmy Yakutis in New Jersey. The order of events is a little unclear here, but it appears that Derenberger received some media attention, and Jimmy and Mouse had not come forward yet at the time, following the frequent pattern that we've seen throughout the series of first encounters versus first reported. Here is a passage from Chapter 1 in Visitors from Lanulos, as recounted by Woodrow Derenberger. At the time, I noticed a car coming up the highway behind me, and he blinked his lights to pass. I kept on the same rate of speed and the car passed me. Directly behind this car, about 50 feet, this ship, as I have come to call it, came up beside my truck, and at first, I thought it to be another car. Then I noticed it had no lights. I then turned my head and glanced at it and saw that it was something I had never seen before. At this time, I was not frightened. Then it pulled a little ahead of me and turned crosswise on the highway and started slowing down. To keep from hitting this object, I slowed my truck and pulled off the highway to the right onto the shoulder so that I could go around it, but it completely blocked the road from shoulder to shoulder. It kept slowing down until it came to a complete stop, as I also did, not more than 8 to 10 feet from it. As soon as it stopped, a door opened and a man stepped out. Immediately, as he stepped to the ground, I received a message to roll my window down on the opposite side of my truck. I heard no audible voice, but I somehow knew what the man had asked of me. I leaned across the truck and rolled down the window. The man then walked up to the side of my truck and stood very close to the door and said that he would like to speak with me. He asked me not to be frightened and then asked my name. I was so frightened by this time that I could not answer him. He told me that I could either think or speak verbally, whichever was easier for me. He said his name was Cold. He then asked me if I worked for a living, and if I had to. I told him yes, that I was a salesman. He said that he was a searcher. He again repeated that I should not be frightened, and he wished me no harm, only happiness. He had a very pleasant smile on his face, and his arms were folded, with his hands tucked under his armpits. He asked me what the lights in the distance were, and although he did not point, I knew the direction about which he was inquiring. I told him it was Parkersburg, a city. He asked me if all the people lived there, and I told him it was a place of business and of trade, and that most of the people lived in outlying areas or the suburbs. He told me that a place of this kind where he was called a gathering. He then said, "Mr. Derenberger, look at me. I am the same as you are. I sleep, breathe, and bleed even as you do." Although he was not speaking verbally to me, I could well understand every word he was saying. I felt no pain of any kind. My truck was running smoothly. Both of my headlights were on, and also the dome lights on my truck. After the man stepped from the ship, it rose from the ground and hovered 50 to 100 feet above my truck during the duration of our conversation. As he walked in front of my truck, I could see him very plainly in the headlights of my truck. He had a very pleasant appearance. He was approximately 5'10" or 11, weighed approximately 180 to 185 pounds. His hair was very dark and thick and combed straight back over his head. He seemed to have a very good tan. He looked normal in every way and was very friendly. The expression on his face changed at times. He then asked me why I was so frightened and said that his country was not nearly as powerful as ours. He told me to report this incident to our local officials, and at a later date, he would confirm my story. He then said that he would wish to meet with me again. I talked with him approximately 10 minutes. I did not see him give any kind of sign, but the ship descended and settled directly behind my truck. Mr. Cold then walked in front of my truck to the ship. The door opened and I could see another form reaching out to close the door, or quite possibly to help Mr. Cold into the ship. The ship then left and went straight up, making a sort of fluttering sound.
Did that bit include the first name Indrid? I heard the Cold bit.
It did not. So the first name Indrid came at a later visit because Derenberger alleged to have met with Indrid Cold many times until he died. Also, his family met with Indrid Cold to the point where his daughter, in 2016, 50 years after the fact, wrote her own book called Beyond Lanulos Our Family's 50 Years with Indrid Cold. And there are other people, quote unquote, besides Indrid Cold that are other associates, I believe is the term that is mostly used. So let's waste no time jumping into the Project Bluebook file surrounding Derenberger's account of Indrid Cold. UFO report summary. This is from Mineral Wells, West Virginia in 1966. Received a call from the following on UFO case. Major Richard W. Shute, Recruiting Detachment 203, Charleston, West Virginia. Some numbers. It was reported to the major that the following person was stopped by a UFO while driving in a car near Parkersburg, West Virginia 2 nights ago. He then reported it to local police, who in turn notified the above. Since reporting procedure was unknown to the major, I attempted to call this person over a 3-hour period. Was unsuccessful. Side note, these are the days of home phones, so that's how he's trying to contact. So 3 hours is not weird. I tried to call over a 3-hour period. Like, yeah, I wasn't home, man. Also, it appears that what he means by the procedure was unknown to major, basically that this very specific major has nothing to do with Project Bluebook and very likely does not even know of its existence. Told the major that unless he hears from me, we will be following through with the investigation. And then there is, in quotations, victim, which I find to be slightly strange.
A little pretentious. Judgmental.
It's a little strange. Also, this is a handwritten document, and it is pretty hard to distinguish at times. It was reported to him that redacted saw UFO at 11 p.m. for approximately 2 hours. No follow-up made in this case. Then there is an attachment of a newspaper article. Salesman chats up with space visitor. With police on Air Force representative listening, Woodrow Derenberger yesterday told of his meeting with a spaceman who did everything short of ask him, take me to your leader. However, the, quote, spaceman did, according to Derenberger, tell him, have no fear, we come from a country that is not as nearly as powerful as yours, we mean you no harm. Derenberger, a salesman and father of 2, held a news conference yesterday to relate the experience he said occurred around 7:30 p.m. on Wednesday while driving home from Marietta, Ohio and Interstate 77. Attending the conference were local policemen and Air Force representative who said he would report Derenberger's account either to Washington or to the UFO Investigative Center at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. So at this point, they know that there's a UFO Investigative Center, but not necessarily all of the things that Project Bluebook is containing, which is out of Wright-Patterson. Derenberger said the episode began when a dark, long object, traveling about the same speed as his panel truck, cut in front of the vehicle and continued to travel at some distance sideways. The object was charcoal gray in color and apparently made of some kind of metal and shaped something like an old kerosene lamp globe, having a flat bottom and a dome-like top. With no visible lights, it moved along 8 to 10 inches above the pavement, blocked the highway, and finally stopped. And we won't continue on with the entire article, but just know that it is attached. But there is no other case notes contained within this very specific document. Just allusions to future updates.
It's foreshadowing in the Blue Book.
And this was written by Major A. It looks like it's Worthington, but it very well could be Washington.
Abraham Washington.
It does look like it might be Abraham. Again, handwritten note.
Absolutely false name.
So Derenberger, in addition to Project Bluebook investigating into this, his claims are being investigated by many different organizations. He claims that he was visited by Captain Bruce Parsons, a former police chief of Parkersburg, who was working security at NASA at the time, and he invited Woodrow and his family to come visit him in Cocoa Beach to meet with the head of NASA. He went on to further claim that he was interrogated at NASA about his encounters with Indrid Cold over the course of a 5-day period by a man who identified himself as Charlie. You should know that at the time, the head of NASA was James Webb, but that does not necessarily mean that the person that would have interrogated him would have been the head of NASA.
That wouldn't even make sense.
Food for thought that he is told that he's going to be meeting with the head of NASA, and instead he gets Charlie, I guess. He further claimed that NICAP had done an investigation into his claims, which is also known as the National Investigations Committee on Aerial Phenomenon, which had been founded in 1956. He also said that he had received questionnaires and the like from the United States Air Force, basically asking him to detail certain things about his encounters. That, I can only imagine, would have had to do with Project Bluebook, simply because we know there's the Project Bluebook file, and the United States Air Force at this time is the head of Project Bluebook. So I'm wondering if after this initial report, the report that I just read, they either didn't go out to meet him, or he couldn't get a hold of him. Like he said, I tried for 3 hours. Oh no. And just sent him like hey, fill this out and tell me. Let me know what's up.
How was your service? Are you very satisfied with your alien? Are you satisfied with your alien?
He seems like he was very satisfied with his alien, because Darren Berger allegedly went on to have a friendship of sorts with Indrid Cold over the next several years, going so far as to many members of his family allegedly meeting Indrid Cold and Indrid Cold's associates. He also claimed Indrid Cold told him that they lived for 125 to 175-ish years. That, quote unquote claim is backed up later by his daughter, who said that over the course of her life of knowing Indrid Cold, he never appeared to age. So, Gandalf, I guess. On that very same night, on that very same road, 2 other men encountered an unidentified flying object land in front of their vehicle. A man allegedly appeared from that object and asked them strange questions, and they went on their way. I can't find a lot of details surrounding those men and the specific questions that they were asked. It is a interesting thing because so much attention is paid to other alleged encounters with Indrid Cold.
I mean, if there's not a lot of info on this one and they came forward later, I'm already like, this one's fake. Of course they're going to choose the same night that first story told. Like, oh yeah, we were on that road, Mr. Creepy Pants was there.
I was also on that very same road that same night, and
I gave Indrid Cold a blowjob.
it was kind of both at the same time.
It was a different one, though.
He wasn't as tan as the others recalled, though.
My mother wasn't even born yet, so I was not on that road.
Sometimes it feels like your business is going 100 miles an hour, barely keeping up. Dell Technologies advisors have the tech you need to get past whatever's in front of you. Call an advisor today at 877-ASK-DELL and do more with modern devices and Windows 10 Pro.
But my grandmother was.
So the only additional sighting after these ones that I'm going to mention, so that there isn't too many cooks in the kitchen for the purposes of this episode, comes from, you guessed it, Point Pleasant, West Virginia. Derenberger sighting is approximately an hour and a half-ish from Point Pleasant. It also predates the Mothman sightings, just to keep that in mind. So Linda Lilly woke in the middle of the night to see someone of Indrid Cold's description standing over her. Quote, "It was a man, a big man, very broad. I couldn't see his face very well, but I could see that he was grinning at me.
Nope.
He walked around the bed and stood right over me.
Nope.
I screamed again and hid under the covers.
Nope.
Whoa.
When I looked again, he was gone." Whether Indrid Cold or sleep paralysis, we have the same reaction, and that, of course, is fuck this shit, I'm out.
Correct.
We are not all in complete agreement here. Sounds like a fun time to me.
Don't hide under the covers. Do anything besides that. Wait, how old is this Linda Lilly? She's an adult woman.
She is a kid of some sort, but her exact age at this time, I do not know. I just know that this is the Lily's family house, and an age where she's living with her parents. Whether that's 17 or 7.
Okay. This is acceptable even at a 17-year level.
I mean, she could be 26 and still living with her parents, right?
I mean, yeah, but that was not common in the 60s at all because, you know, they could afford things. That description of Indrid Cold, while Derenberger says that he is smiling and or he has a grin on his face, Indrid Cold would then almost take on his own cryptid persona, being known as the Smiling Man or the Grinning Man. Indrid Cold is also different because while he is, according to Derenberger and according to, like, the mythos surrounding him, extraterrestrial in nature, having come from the Ganymede galaxy, which I don't think exists. There's a Ganymede moon, but there are lots of galaxies that are just numbers, and Indrid Cold, I think, would know the name of his own galaxy, I guess. I'm not gonna, like, mansplain Indrid Cold's own galaxy to him, or whatever. But I'm just saying.
Your brain cannot comprehend if I said the real galaxy's name, so we're just gonna go with Bob.
Okay, from the galaxy Bob, the planet Lanulos. So, the Grinning Man or the Smiling Man is that cryptid-like entity, but for a quote-unquote alien creature, the descriptions surrounding Indrid Cold are really interesting. Oftentimes, he's described as not having a nose, ears, or hair, but we should mention that in Derenberger does say he has black slick back hair. When you see depictions of him, especially done by artists on different cryptid wikis and different images when you do a Google search, they will oftentimes have him with dark hair and almost inset nose, very Lord Voldemort. Like, there's a nose, but there's no nose. Like, there's holes for a nose, but there isn't a nose. He is described between 5'11" and being slightly over 6 feet tall, depending on who you're asking. Sometimes wearing a regular suit, and then other times wearing a reflective green suit with a black belt. Almost always he has a darker tan complexion and small eyes that are set far enough apart to be unsettling. But in terms of what at this point in time aliens are thought of as or being described as, even in modern times, the way that we think of quote-unquote aliens, Indrid Cold is like a different world apart where it's much more humanoid with just slightly different features, enough to be unsettling, almost like some of those descriptions of the Men in Black.
Very tan. The very tan doesn't feel quite as racist. It's not quite the dog whistle.
Derenberger says nicely tanned.
A Mediterranean complexion.
Right. This brings us to another theory about Indrid Cold that I want to mention because I find it very interesting. Connor Randall, who some of our listeners may know from Hellier, where he's an executive producer, he's also a co-creator of the Estes method of paranormal investigation.
The headphone one?
Yeah, you're blindfolded and you're listening to a spirit box in the headphones that was created at the Stanley Hotel. That's Connor Randall. You can hear more about the Estes method in last year's Halloween episode featuring Ghosting Joey, but he made a case on the Serial Spirits podcast for Indrid Cold being an ultra-terrestrial versus an extraterrestrial.
Ultra-alien! Mega-alien!
No, I just picture, like, Godzilla alien. Chip, stop it! So, ultra-terrestrial, which, if you either have watched Hellier or Ancient Aliens, you might have heard the term before. It basically means coming from an alternate universe of some sort, rather than from outer space.
From the ultra dimension.
So another dimension, another timeline, another universe, and there's this idea of windows where you could pass from one space into the next space, or one dimension into another, where time and space overlap.
Liminal spaces.
I don't want to get too much into it because that is a whole other rabbit hole. But is it then possible under that theory? Obviously, throughout this whole series, we're working off the idea anything is possible. Let's just propose it and talk about it.
Is that not what this whole podcast is?
I'm just saying, don't be a downer yet. I understand. You instantly are gonna want to. With the idea of the ultra-terrestrial, is it then possible that Mothman and Indrid Cold, the Men in Black, all of these strange happenings that start taking place in the fall of 1966 within a very small area that are not linked, but they're somehow all linked because of their strangeness and how close in proximity they are to one another. Is it possible that these things are all happening in this small space because of one of these windows due to some sort of convergence in realities?
Yes, if I accept the premise of dimension travel, then yes. If I accept this premise, yes, it could be.
I will say that Darren Berger proposes that Indrid Cold is, he's an alien, but this theory basically is saying, yeah, I'm sure Indrid Cold does think that.
Wait, Indrid Cold thinks he's that?
Indrid Cold tells Darren Berger at some point during their, tea parties. I don't know what they're doing together.
We don't even have to work to ship this. This is too easy. Low-hanging fruit.
Yeah, at some point during their exchanges.
Strangers to lovers to friends to aliens.
So some of the things that are connecting these are obviously the time period that this is happening in, the space that this is happening in. But then another thing that connects these two things is our man John Keel. Darren Berger seeks out John Keel, who at the time was very interested in UFOs. He was a ufologist. John Keel then enters the picture in terms of these mysterious happenings out of West Virginia at the time, which leads John to include little bits about Indrid Cold within the Mothman prophecies. John was very skeptical, but he did end up writing a foreword to Visitors from Lanulos.
So not that skeptical.
No, so John's whole thing is, I don't know that I believe this guy, but I believe that he believes it, and I think we should hear him out, because some of the things that Darren Berger is saying feel like they really gel with some of the popular scientific things that people are thinking about at the time. He has an intriguing story, not only this initial encounter, but also subsequent encounters, the fact that his family seems involved, the fact that he seems to really believe it, the fact that Indrid Cold is unlike any kind of alien encounter that has ever been talked about at this time. He's not the quote-unquote alien that most people would picture. And because of the Men in Black and other things that John Keel ends up encountering while he goes to this area, and then the Mothman sighting starts happening, all with this very specific period of time. So I think all of the strange coincidences and all these Mothman sightings and having other sightings of UFOs in the area, it appeals to John Keel in a way that he doesn't necessarily believe everything that's being said, but wants other people to dissect it and pick it apart and give them some food for thought. And that the basis of what Darren Berger is proposing, whether it's true or not, or parts are true, or Darren Berger just believes it, the idea that people will talk about it and read about it could lead to other better things and discoveries down the road.
Do a shotgun, throw things at the wall and see what sticks, sort of.
I just think it's so different from everything that's kind of happening at this period of time.
Also, remind me what year it is?
It's 1966.
Star Trek, the original series, is out. September 8th.
Interesting. So it's about a month from the first episode of Star Trek airing, a little less than a month from the first episode of Star Trek airing to the first sighting of Indrid Cold. A month later, the second Darren Berger sighting of Indrid Cold. A month after that, Mothman sightings start.
Darren Berger never describes Indrid Cold in that same creepy way that everyone else does, right? Like, his face was horrifying. He's just like, nah, he was kind of hot.
It looks kind of strange-ish, but he has a pleasant look to him still. He's tanned, and he has a big smile on his face. Subsequently, why are you always smiling like that? It's kind of weird. If somebody ever came up to me and was just smiling, I would be like, this is very pleasant on my first encounter. But then my second and third encounters, I'd be like, you okay? You okay, man? You gonna kill me? You gonna snap?
So basically, he looked like a guy who had weird physical things that was hired by the government to further creep people out and change stories and make a friend to further throw off all the things that were going around Project Bluebook. That's the kind of guy he looked like.
Sounds about right.
Well, we've solved it.
That's my theory. That's what I'm going with. This poor guy fell for it and made friends with this guy.
In terms of links, we know that Indrid Cold is linked to Project Bluebook because there's a Project Bluebook file. We also know that Project Bluebook is interviewing people at this period of time in Point Pleasant, West Virginia, which leads us to, is Project Bluebook and the Men in Black the same thing? Are these government agents actually people that worked for Project Bluebook? They just weren't identifying themselves as working for Project Bluebook or working for the Air Force. And then those same Men in Black then link back to Mothman and them trying to intimidate witnesses that are seeing Mothman and seeing UFOs, all within about an hour and a half driving distance, all in this 13-month period of time. Is that a coincidence?
Okay, if we're slipping through dimensions, obviously it is all the same.
Those are obviously intrinsically linked if we're talking about the like ultra dimensional windows type of thing. But even just in terms of the government covering both things up, that's also not that far-fetched. Then it comes back to why around this town in this year do all these strange things start happening, and do they become a bigger deal because of these Men in Black trying to suppress it, that people get louder or start whispering about it more because of that?
I've got it. The false flag theory, this is their pilot test of using the false flags, and it goes off without a hitch. The government is like, oh, we can do this anytime, any place. Look, we did it too good.
Then, what is the false flag covering up? Is it covering up the existence of Project Bluebook, these quote-unquote Men in Black, so that they can actually investigate the UFOs?
It could just be Bluebook. It could just be Project Bluebook, because at that time, they were obviously trying to cover it up, right? It could also be other projects, like Mothman could be its own project that literally did happen and did escape, and that was a cover-up. I mean, it could be aliens. Those UFOs could have been spotted.
Could also be that whatever the truth behind Mothman is looks different than what we think of Mothman being, just because of the fear of something being strange looking, paired with fear, paired with night, paired with all of these different things that people were seeing. And that whatever that inflated version of the truth became, they were like, yeah, we're just going to let that run, because that's what people are going to look for, I guess. Now that we've concluded talking about Men in Black and Mothman and Indrid Cold, do you guys have any different opinions now than you did when we started the series? And or what are you ruminating on?
I'm all about the false flag that we got to last episode.
Yeah, I agree.
Military plans.
Just for the purposes of discussion, what is the real truth of it? Like, what came first, the chicken or the egg? Did the Indrid Cold thing, because it happened first, is that the thing that they were like, okay, don't pay attention to all of these UFO stories that are circulating? Was it Mothman, don't pay attention to this thing that's happening? Is it something else? And if so, how do we then explain the 100 reports concerning Mothman specifically?
I'm thinking all of it is the distraction. It's orchestrated, and then, because people like to tell the stories, it gets enhanced by the people without even having to add more. But initially, all the main stuff set up to look suspicious and distracting.
Why pick this town?
Isolated, easy to track people. Word of mouth is real easy to follow.
I mean, where was Project Bluebook headquartered at?
Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio. I want to say it's like 4.5 hours from here.
Well, you don't want to be, like, right outside your front door. That would be a horrible idea.
I will say that the most intriguing thing to me is Connor's theory. The idea of windows. The science behind it is possible, and that's the most intriguing thing. I find string theory and, like, multiverse very interesting. That concludes our 3-part series on West Virginia. Let us know what you think, any theories that we missed or didn't highlight, and what conclusions you have come to throughout the series. You could do so by texting us or calling us at 313-355-3411 or emailing us at thedeepdarktruthpodcast@gmail.com. Until next time, I'm Mo.
I'm Chip.
And I'm still Mikey.
Maybe not.
Sometimes it feels like your business is growing 100 miles an hour, barely keeping up. Dell Technologies advisors have the tech you need to get past whatever's in front of you. Call an advisor today at 877-ASK-DELL and do more with modern devices and Windows 10 Pro.